General Protocol Spaces, banking on freedom.
Welcome to General Bull 31 of N. We're calling this one Last Minute Things because we had a pretty big surprise last week with the announcement of not just big ints as a chip that does big ints, but a chip that does big ints, like 258, not bit, but 258 byte integers. These are huge, and it's pretty exciting, interesting topic for us. A very relevant topic for general protocols, but it's very kind of at the last minute, at the wire. So it's also an interesting topic for that reason. So yeah, we're gonna have a little talk about it and see how things go. So you've been thinking about this a lot. We've both been thinking about this a lot, right? We've looked at the chip, looked at the announcement and the research that's been going on. We have a lot of thoughts about it. You have a starting point. Where do you think would be a good point to start?
I know we have covered this quite a bit in our spaces, multiple episodes of it, especially the especially the earlier episodes of it. Um, but yeah, I do want to circle back to the chip process a little bit, and not ju- and I'm not going to talk about the exact procedures and details right here, but I want to talk about the principles that led to the chip process documentation, and how we have followed things so far. So the principle, the spirit, the motivation behind the chip process was originally due to all the turmoils that Bitcoin Cash has gone through all through these years. We've had splits, multiple of them, and some really catastrophic events, very upset app developers, and some really near misses in terms of the general well-being of the network itself, both technical and economically. So the chip process was not something that was dictated from heaven, but rather a collection of thoughts and procedures aimed at avoiding this. And the way to avoid this is to have things, be generally predictable. Um, you we follow a relatively stable path. Like people have over this past few years generally accepted that, okay, yeah, so we're gonna have the upgrade release in November, and then the actual upgrade celebration in May, and that's kind of how things go. And then later on, when Cash Tokens came out, we also have a ChipNAD, which further strengthened this because we are going to upgrade the test network, a test network in November, and that leaves plenty of time for people to test and stuff. And importantly, it's not just this hard deadlines when codes become available and consensus is changed. Um, we also have a relatively lengthy time that stretches, because realistically people are not going to work very much on things before May. So we have a relatively lengthy time from May to November when things are locked in. When people talk about the very next upgrade or upgrades, and gain consensus of it, polish the test and the specifications. We have a relatively lengthy time. Um, so with that in context, all of this isn't imposed by the headmaster or anything like that. All of this is to increase confidence and make sure things are not rushed, make sure nothing goes terribly wrong, and make sure people get the memo that BCH is somewhere stable to build on. Things are not going to be slap on last minute. So with all those in context, we are now in August, and we have a fresh chip on our we have a fresh chip on our doorstep. A lot of people are excited about it, including General Protocols. But it is August, and it just came out. It is it is quite under spec, and for this under specking, it is probably the latest ever chip that aims for the next year ever. Um, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. If anyone has a counterexample since 2020, please correct me. So yeah, this is the context.
All right, let's go home, boys. We're done.
Anyway,
and that's kind of where we are, right? Because it's very similar to this article that we posted 3 years ago, where we were doing an upgrade, or there was an upgrade on the table, right? There's a chip on the table. It was very early in the the Lindy effect. The age of the chip process was very young, but we had this upgrade that we really wanted to do. I'll link it later in the Twitter thread. And I mean, it would really help us. Like, it would have been a huge help for General Protocols and for AnyHedge, right? Because AnyHedge used to be so complicated in order to handle any amounts that were larger than like trivial amounts of BCH, trivial from a financial instrument perspective, right? And AnyHedge used to be, the majority of it used to be there to handle complexity of just that. Like, the actual logic of the contract is not that big, but the logic needed to handle getting around these limits was the majority of it. And that chip would have really helped us, right? I think, what was it? It was which one was it? It was
64-bit and opmal, was it?
Yeah, I think it was. It was opmal and 64-bit. You're right. So this was the previous big integer. This is the big integer, and it was the big integer one. And yeah, we said, you know what? It's not ready. If we do this, we're gonna be throwing away the process right at the beginning, and just basically going back to, well, whatever. If people like it, then we'll just do it anyway. And at that time we said, no, we think it should wait until the next year, even though we would have massively benefited from it. And we waited for a year to get that in. And I think in hindsight, it was the right choice, because it had a lot more thought to go into it, right? There was a lot more discussion. There was more people came in to give insight on it. It improved. So yeah, there was a lot of room for that chip to improve, and it did. Now, I'm not saying that this one is in the same boat, but it sure feels very similar. So because General Protocols would also benefit from this, having the big integers. So currently the integers that are available are 64-bit. And that's really nice compared to 32-bit, like very, very nice compared to 32-bit that we had before. But it's still a really low ceiling, and you bump in your head into that regularly, trying to do anything interesting. And so having this number be higher, and not only higher, but to the point that you can do it, like, opens up new possibilities of math that you can do that you wouldn't be able to do with 64-bit is really nice, right? Like, we could simplify our code. Other people can not only simplify their code, which is a big part of it, as we found before, but they can do new things that would be very hard to do otherwise. I guess I should cover 2 points. One is like the reasons that it's a really good idea, and then I guess yeah, we should get into kind of our take on maybe
I think
what kind of things are possible.
I
What
think you
we should.
could. I think you could probably expand a bit more about this part, about this particular proposal that we're talking about. Because while we have stared at it for the past week or so, a lot of people in the audience might not have done so. So it's probably, yeah.
Right. Let me step back a little bit. So forget about the idea of whether it's the chip process and everything, like, but just what's being proposed is very cool. So there's two parts. One is called the VM limits, which allows more things to be done. It basically allows you to put more code into a smart contract, and this has been worked on very carefully to find and make sure that there's no sharp edges on it, that we're not going to do something that causes nodes to get denial of service, that causes miners to get upset because now they're doing heavy processing for free or something like that, right? So that has been done very carefully, and that's a really great thing for us, and I think anybody who's writing contracts that are non-trivial. You need more space to write contracts, so that's great, and that's been researched quite a bit. And then there's the second part of it, which just came out last week or this week, whatever, and that is to take the integers of the virtual machine, of the Bitcoin Cash virtual machine, and like I was saying in the past, a long time ago, they were 32 bits. And then in the last two upgrades ago, I think, or three, I don't know when it was, a while back, we did an upgrade from 32 to 64 bits, which, as I said, was a huge improvement. It was a giant, very useful improvement that simplified a lot of things. And I think other people probably wouldn't have even started working on projects like Cauldron and other projects like Guru and I'm sure others. It wouldn't have even been interesting to start those projects
That's the
if we had had
2022
32.
upgrade. Yeah.
Yeah, 2022. Nobody would have even started projects if we didn't have 64-bit. So that was a huge upgrade. And then similarly, there's other use cases where even if you have 64-bit, you can do something called emulated math to use bigger numbers, but it's really complicated and risky. And you end up having to like split your contract across multiple transactions in order to basically do a fake process where you end up with the same result of using bigger numbers than 64-bit, but you have to break it up into pieces and do all these calculations separately and then put them back together at the end. It's a pretty ugly mess, but it works. That's called emulated math. And so now there's people who are still running into that ceiling. Like I said, the 64-bit is great, but it's not quite enough. And so we're considering this chip is considering increasing it further.
Yeah, usually what happens, sorry for context, for a
Yeah,
little
go
bit
ahead.
of context, usually what happens is that you said, 64-bit numbers are huge, so that's what you will ever need, right? But what actually ends up happening is that, yeah, so I have a series of math operations, and I need to multiply some of these 64-bit numbers together, and then immediately you bust that 64-bit number limit, even if you plan to later cut it back by division or whatever. You bust that limit and you have to get around it. So your math becomes complicated, even if you start with and end up with usable numbers that are well within the 64-bit limit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, that's right. And they came together, right? The 64-bit and the multiplication came together. Multiplication was a joke when we had 32-bit. Like you would break the limit almost every time you tried to do something. With 64-bit, it's like, okay, we can do stuff, but you're still bumping your head
Yeah.
against that ceiling. And then it's funny with cash tokens, we release cash tokens with right, it allows a number of tokens that you can very quickly break the 64-bit limit if you do anything with it at all. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do now, especially with cash tokens, where you can very easily break the 64-bit limit. And so it's not very risky, right? There's this one special edge case where if you increase the size of the integers further, there's this one special edge case that is kind of a breaking change, but otherwise it's like an invisible change and nobody cares. And that special case is if somebody made a contract where they depended on the contract to stop because they overflowed the integer with some math, then once the integers become larger, it no longer stops because that operation actually works okay. Like if you did a maximum size integer times maximum size integer, you're going to overflow. Or you do a 64-bit number times a 64-bit number, then the script would have stopped. But once you increase the size of the integers, it no longer stops when you do that, because it's like 64 bits times 64 bit. That's okay, 128 bit. Yeah, no problem. We have not only 128 bits, we have 258 bytes of integer space to work with.
Yeah.
So you stop running that, but that's like the only edge case. Otherwise, it's an invisible, pretty painless, smooth upgrade that you can do.
Yeah. So for a more relatable example, which is pretty dumb, imagine you have a contract that says, "Oh no, I need a sanity check," and people cannot redeem literally the entire supply of my tokens in this contract. Like that would be really bad, and please don't do that. The sane way to do that, of course, is to set a limit, and then you do subtraction or equal or whatever to compare that number to the total to the amount of tokens being redeemed. And if it fails that check, your contract is stopped. That would be the same way to do it. But you could also do it the alternative way and say, oh, the amount of tokens being redeemed, I will multiply it by another really large number and set no check at the end of it. If this operation fails because we have this digit limit, then the contract fails. Yay, I stopped the bad guys. Well, if you do your contract in this super weird way, then once the math limit is increased, then your contract would no longer stop the bad guys. Yeah, hopefully this is a bit more relatable.
Right, yeah. Stop the bad guys. Put it in terms of bad guys and good guys. That always works.
But yeah, it would be a really weird way to do something that could be otherwise done much more simply.
Yes. So, long story short, it theoretically it's a really safe upgrade. There's in the past we did some, like for the previous chip, we did some investigation to check, like does anybody actually depend on that? Does that ever actually block scripts? And it's very hard to test a negative, because any scripts that would have been blocked didn't get into transactions, so we never saw them. So it's hard to say that this never happened, that nobody was depending on that, but nobody was able to come up with anything. Nobody was able to come up with any past contract that was doing math like that, or knew of one that actively was trying to use that, and so forth. And I think the same case is true today, but I don't know. I don't know if Jason has done that investigation to see if in the meantime anybody is depending on that limit. But I'd be very surprised if anyone was. It's more like the opposite, where people desperately are working to get around that limit and not be impacted by it. Yeah, so I think that part will be pretty, will probably be pretty safe. And that leads to the other part of the picture, right? Which is like, all right, what needs to be done? Because like I was saying, I want to see this. This will be very helpful for us. What else do you think needs to happen? You name, like what's left to be done on it?
Well, there are two parts. There are two parts of this. So in the purely technical part, the other side of the coin is that this massive expansion to 258 bytes, not bits. So how much is that? How much is that in bit? How much is that in bit terms? Basically, 2,000 something bits.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically, we are wading into arbitrary precision territory, which I'm sure Callan if he's here. I still don't see him. We invited him, but I'm sure Callan and Jason tested out on C++, and the performance is okay. And in Python is probably also okay. I don't know. I don't know about JavaScript, but yeah. We need to make sure that the performance is acceptable across implementations and languages, so that we don't screw up any future possibilities, and screw with scaling. Um, and that also, in turn, as Jason has mentioned in his previous talks, that also in turn impact the VM limits chip, because now several operations like multiplication becomes much more impactful in terms of performance. So now they need their own limits. Now they would need their own sane limits. So that is the technical part of it, and I don't believe that part is quite done yet. It is August, and the other part is that the chip is, other than the very bare bones description of what the thing is, it is extremely, how I should say, un, um under described. Uh, Basically, none of the things that you typically expect in the chip are there. Usually by June or July, we would have a full rationale. And some pretty nice analysis. For if people want example, they could look at the uh, ABLA chip, ABLA chip, that was written by Bitcoin Cash Autist in the past. It, that was activated in the past May. That was pretty nice. And then there will be test vectors, and then it's August. There should be some kind of initial results coming in, and people would be busy scurrying around, gathering opinions of people, pros and cons. There will be heated discussions in the issues list already, and more importantly, a full technical specification of what kind of how each operation is expected to behave. In this case, at least we probably should describe how opmul would work, among other things. None of those are present, and we have a pretty bare bones, minimalistic description of things.
Right.
So
And
that is kind of worrying. We are extremely excited about this, but a lot of the reservations could come from this. This could have, of course, change a lot in the coming week or two. But yeah.
And as we saw, so Bitcoin Cash podcast is in the audience here, and as we saw on the one this week or last week, whenever it was, very recently, Jason and Jeremy did the podcast, and I said in that group that was probably literally the single highest signal discussion that happened, for a while in crypto, was listening to that discussion and what it means for Bitcoin Cash, right? Both the VM limits chip and the big integers. So that was huge. And in that, he discussed a lot of work that he and Callan have done. And I've seen posts about it. So I've seen, like the evidence that they are like deep in work on doing really comprehensive evaluation of the risks and the edges and the costs of doing operations with the big integers. And also in together with the VM limits chip, as you were mentioning, they're tied together to some degree. And so apparently there's a huge amount of work that's been done over the last 4 months, he said. And of course, that will be important to see. But as Yunim was saying, that's more like the things that, according to the chip process, would already be on the table and already be under evaluation and already kind of be agreed on even at this point, right? And it's more like looking to get into the final stages of okay, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's all implement it and do this thing. But that's not where it is. So, right. Uh, it does seem like you said, things probably will change on the chip very quickly in the coming days. But what's not there is not there, and we are looking forward to it. So, what I was gonna bring up, do you mind if I move on to the question of the VM limits chip
Oh,
and
go for it. Go for it.
the integers chip together? So, Jason brought up a point in Jeremy's podcast, the BCH podcast, that doing the big integers is connected back to VM limits. And so in order to decide good VM limits, you have to also understand what the size of the integers are going to be for various reasons. As I understand it, one of them is because if the number is small, then you're going to need much larger VM limits to allow for emulated math as a regular occurrence. And then if they're large, that also it's not free, right? Having very large integers is not free. It does incur some amount of penalty on computation or other issues, maybe size of transactions. But I'm not sure if he got into it exactly what the dangers or the risks of having that as a very large number. Like, why not 4,000 bytes? Why not 10,000 bytes? Something big enough that you'll never have any kind of operation that can't fit in it. Why not do it even bigger? And he was saying, I don't think he said exactly why, but he was suggesting that doing it incredibly large actually has costs that you don't want to take. And he was looking at the history of how Satoshi had set the original numbers and what he thought was reasonable and so forth. So he went through some rationale of why to pick that number. So anyway, long story short, the two are connected, right? Choosing the size of the big integers and the VM limits is a connected problem. So he suggests that if you haven't understood clearly the limits of the two things together, you can't really say that you understand what the VM limits should be. Because the obvious suggestion is if somebody, not just general protocols, anyway, if anybody thinks, hey, wait, this big int is great, but we want to do it later, let's do the VM limits first. I think the suggestion was, well, if you don't understand the big integers yet, the limits of that, then you can't really be confident about the VM limits. And you can set things small and then make them bigger later. That's usually a pretty safe thing to do. Although it has the same problem that I mentioned about breaking boundaries and having this weird edge case where you might break someone's rules. So you can you could do one, but then if you get it wrong, you might have screwed it up. And making things smaller later is usually a very, very bad thing to do. Like that really will break things. And so you don't ever want to make things bigger and then later say, oh, look, we're sorry, we screwed up. This should have been smaller. And so I think the suggestion is doing VM limits separately is a bit of a fraught thing to do if you haven't fully understood what you want to do with the big integers.
Yeah.
Having said that, it seems like we could use the research on, to me, it seems like we could use the research on big integers to get a really close idea. Like, yeah, we're pretty sure that this is what we want to do with those. It's just that research itself hasn't quite reached the stage that it needs to be at. And so if we do understand that pretty well, then we should be able to set the VM limits and get VM limits through, because VM limits is something that everybody has been waiting for a very long time, and it will be really great to get that through. So yeah, that's my impression. Did you have a different impression that we'd be able to set, or?
So I have a take on this that I think people haven't been talking about that much. I mean, in particular, Jason hasn't been talking about that much. So I want to bring it here. So I mean, what's lying in front of us are basically what looks like a binary choice, right? So you have the original VM limits chip, which hasn't been changed in multiple months. So that VM limits chip assumes basically a 64-bit number system, and so continuing with the original VM limits chip has some consequences. You can have a more permissive set of limits because 64-bit numbers are less impactful in performance in some opcodes than higher arbitrary position numbers. And on the other hand, you not only can have a more permissive set of limits, but you also want a more permissive set of limits because sticking with 64-bit numbers would mean that a lot of the downstream applications, especially in DeFi, would want more extra headroom to maneuver around, to do their custom maneuvers around the 64-bit number limit. Because they don't get higher limits, they need to use additional opcodes, so you need higher limits. On the other hand, if you have the begins, the higher almost arbitrary precision number limits, then first, you cannot have as permissive a expansion anymore, because some of your opcodes are going to be impacted in performance. So you will want to, in Jason's words, you will want to limit their density per byte in order for them to not clog up the network. But on the other hand, because running contracts are now so much more efficient, you don't have to do weird kludges around things anymore. You now um, you now you may no longer want as permissive an expansion anymore because your contracts are so much more efficient. You don't have to do those custom maneuvers anymore. So these are the two choices as I see it that basically makes a case for why VM limits and big in's proposal are tied together. Like you like the VM limits that you end up with, the parameters is directly linked to the big ins.
Yeah, and to
So
re-emphasize, like, right, the previous AnyEdge contract, more than 50%, I think it was something like 70% of the code was dealing with the previous 32-bit integer limit. Like, it's a big deal. It really changes
yeah,
how you
yes,
code.
math is hard. Um, but yeah, so I think there is a third scenario that people haven't considered as much though, which is what is the status quo. So the status quo is basically we have a 64-bit limit. There is no big in the expansion, and there is no VM limits expansion or realignment of any kind. So it is very restrictive and choking a lot of the contracts that need to do math today. Um, so
And not only math, just the VM limits are so small that even just normal logic is hard to fit in. It's really
yes,
small. It's
yes.
a small box.
So consider that if we have done some research on would big int would have an impact, how big int would have an impact on the VM limits. It would basically make more conservative VM limit expansion um, both more more feasible and also more necessary. And if we adopt that conservative limit that is tied to big int without activating big int, that would still be a massive win to everyone writing a contract today under 64-bit number limits, because the status quo is just so suffocating. um, and I think people need to consider this. People need to consider this possibility seriously, um, because if I think if not really for general protocols, because general protocols, we work around this limit. We got the uh, we are at a fairly okay place regarding any hedge. But all the other DeFi developers, they could use a even modest, well, relatively modest increase in VM limits that caters to big int without activating big int. That would still be a massive improvement to the status quo. And if these two are tied together and say, oh yeah, we don't have big int, and these two should go together, therefore we should therefore one is not going to make it, so we're not going to do the other, and everything would have to be chucked a year after. That would be quite a tragedy, I would say. People should seriously consider the possibility that we do a more conservative upgrade on VM limits first.
Yeah, yeah. And I can say a little bit more detail about AnyHedge. So it's okay today because it was written, back in the day when you had to hyper optimize things and you had to do things that you really wouldn't normally want to do in programming, right? You do things when you hyper optimize things, the code becomes kind of ugly, doesn't follow best practices. It's safe, right? Like we've very strictly confirmed that it's safe, but you look at the code and it's like, oh my god, why would you write this way? And the answer is because we were in an even smaller box than we are today, and we had to fit it inside that box. We didn't have introspection, we didn't have shit. And so yeah, fitting it inside that tiny box made it so that whatever we had was already feasible to fit in. But if we were doing it today, and there was no cash tokens either, if we were doing it, starting from scratch today and writing AnyHedge, we would obviously use cash tokens. We would obviously want bigger numbers. And the code that you would come up with naturally to do AnyHedge today, there's no way it would fit, in the old limits. You'd very quickly run into a wall and be like, oh, this sucks. There's no space here for this. But because of our previous constraints, we did fit it all into what was available. So yeah, the increasing the VM limits would be a huge gain in itself. And it would also allow to fit in a bunch of emulated math so that if you really need to, you could still do it. Now, in the podcast, they made the point, which is totally valid, and they totally understand it, that doing emulated math is not fun and it's dangerous. And it greatly lengthens the cost and resources needed to get a project done if you need these big numbers, or it binds you in what you can accomplish, because if you don't want to do the emulated math. So I totally get that too. But that's one of those things. That's one of those things we have to balance and make sure we're doing the right thing, and make sure this thing stays safe. Because like Uname said, the point of all this is not to follow a process. The point of all this is for Bitcoin Cash to be stable, predictable, and work for everyone, and never break down, right? And never do something dumb that people will look, because it's very easy to lose trust, right? You make one little mistake and you lose trust. And that's a big deal.
It needs to inspire confidence. That's what we need.
It needs to inspire confidence. And so we gotta consider all the parts of the picture.
Having said all that, and having said all the things that people should seriously consider as possibilities, because it's very easy to get lost in either the oh my god, this is so exciting and we must do that, and if we don't do all this, if we don't activate big int, you guys are a bunch of losers. Or on the flip side, that oh my god, this is so rushed, we should just shelf the whole thing, you guys are irresponsible. It's kind of easy to get lost. So I think it's okay to consider the full spectrum of possibilities, especially as we go into some really intense discussion and work getting done in the next weeks to months. But having said all that, I also want to say that, you know, this is not like, oh, General Protocol's people, these two dudes are dictating how this should go. And you know, the Big Ins is a very attractive proposal, even as a concept, and um, you know, there's still a possibility that it will make it. It would require very intense work and you know, some very timely deliveries that may or may not happen. You know, it's possible, but we don't know whether that would happen, especially given the requirements. And that, you know, it's possible. It's possible, but but I think we want to give people an idea of what we're coming up against, and so don't get overly excited, you know, because that might lead to weird things happening down the line, and don't get too doom and gloom. That's all I want to say.
Yeah. Don't get too excited. Don't get too doom and gloom. Just keep cool. Keep your eye on the prize, which is much, much further out than anything that we're considering for upgrades right now, right? And yeah, make good decisions, because in the end, like Uname said, there's nobody dictating this, right? If BCHN as a whole, Bitcoin Verde, Knuth Node, if you know, General Protocols, Guru, BCH Podcast, etc., Selene developers, you know, if everybody individually, the way Chip works is everybody individually looks at it and says, you know what, I think this is okay. I think this is good. And I think other people should agree with this, and I'm going to implement it. And that's a big thing to say, right? That's a very big thing to say, because you don't want to go back on your word. You can, but there's trust issues involved there as well. Um, but it is possible that a lot of people, that a large, or you know, almost everybody involved looks at it and says, you know what, this is okay. This is a good idea. We're going to do this. I'm going to implement this in my stuff. I'm going to start working and implement this because I think this is going through for 2025. And you know, all right. So everybody thinks it's safe. Then that's what's happening. That's how chip process works. It's individual decisions about what people are going to do. And then the other side is also possible that some critical projects say, you know what, it's a great idea, but we'd rather have VM limits go in with big ints as a guiding future thing that's going to probably happen, and do VM limits in that vein, like a conservative VM limits upgrade. So yeah, we're not dictating anything. We don't have power to dictate anything. We're just saying what we think about it, because maybe that side of the conversation has been underdeveloped. And so we'd like to make sure that it's a full conversation going on. The things that need to get published, yeah, like Uname said, there's going to need to be some very timely means, like really, really soon. Publication of really solid completion of the chip, which includes all the sections like risks, costs, the implementation, the
Test
specification,
vectors.
the test vectors for others, etc. And it sounds like Jason has those, right? Like, it sounds like he has them in his back pocket. So I'm not sure. but not only that, that's got to be published. And then also everybody has to have time to digest that, right? Like the nodes have to have time to look at that, implement that in their nodes, implement that, make sure that it's not going to break wallets, it's not going to break apps. Like everybody's got to have the time to review that. Not everybody, but you know, there has to be time to review. Like you can't just publish something and say, okay, it's done, let's go. Right? You got to actually consider it and make sure that it's convincing, right? Because just going with, okay, I trust that guy, let's just do it, that's dangerous. However smart someone is, you got to convince yourself. And so the time needs to be done for that. So that has to be timely as well. So I'd love for the chip to go through. My current estimate is that the smart thing to do is to do VM limits without big int. but do it again in line with what we think is probably going to happen with Big Int. But I'd be very happy for everything to just drop mana from the sky, and Big Int is fully specified, everything ready tomorrow. It'd be fucking great. So I don't know. Do you have a particular stance you wanna take on it? So General Protocols doesn't have a stance yet. We haven't come together and made an official stance yet. So that was just my personal feeling about it.
So some additional context on this is that the original VM limit proposal has been sitting around for 3 years now. It was originally proposed on 2021. So there might be flaws with that proposal, but nobody can say that it hasn't been sitting around waiting for people to look at it for long enough yet. That's one thing you cannot say about that. The Biggins proposal, on the other hand, is the 258 byte thing is relatively, well, not just relatively new. It is really, really freaking new. Almost nobody has seen it or heard about even that this thing is gonna get proposed until like last week. So there is a big contrast between those two. With that said, my personal hope is that there will be a avalanche of deliveries in the next week or two, and things are gonna get filled up, and then all the rest of us are gonna get busy with footwork, going around, asking for agreements or opinions in the next month, and then both both proposals are going to make it for in time for activation of 2025. That's my personal hope. But that's what I hope. That's that's a really tall bar to clear. We'll see whether it clears. You're muted. If you're
Yeah, sorry. I was going through trying to find all the related stuff to list up in the Twitter thread. So there's the chip process. There's the VM limits chip, which has been there since 2021, and then there's the Big Ints chip, which I'll also list up in there. What else is the relevant stuff here? There's this old article that we wrote. I mean, it's not super relevant, but it's a it's a data point to look at and be like, yeah, we've also had a point in the past where not only us but others agreed that there's this amazing thing that we really desperately want, but it would be irresponsible at that point, right? I'm not talking about this one. At that point, we thought it would be irresponsible to go through with the chip. That was our official opinion from General Protocols at the time, and we needed it. It needed to season and stay in the oven for a little while longer.
That was a relevant point. Was that introspection?
Yeah, it was multiplication. No, it was multiplication.
Multiplication. Yeah, and 64.
Yeah, and 64 bits. Yeah.
Yeah, but also obviously introspection had a massive impact on how it worked.
Oh, it was huge. Yeah, and the reason we didn't do VM limits first was because we still had all these things that we obviously needed to do first, like introspection and others. Like that was why VM limits didn't happen first.
Yeah, like most of these things today would simply just be complete disasters if we still have to do the check data sig emulation.
Yeah. None of the stuff that people are doing today would be possible. Absolutely not within VM limits, without introspection, and it would be so dangerous doing it the old way with the fake introspection. Yeah. So I'll share a bunch of those in there. That's all I have to say about that. I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to all this stuff coming out and figuring out how safe it is. And I actually think, just hypothetically speaking, that the Big Ints is a safe upgrade for all the reasons that I explained before. I don't think it's a really dangerous thing. As Jason has explained, and I agree, other implementations like Python, JavaScript, etc., they all deal with arbitrary precision integers as a matter of course, right? It's just built into them. So the implementation stuff should be pretty easy.
Well, the
And then
performance differs, right? So
performance difference is also not that big a deal, right? Like computation of these things is minuscule, like
right,
in the overall scheme of costs.
right,
Um, but now if you did it unlimited, like you did 10,000 bytes or whatever, then it does start to get like, well, yeah, that's a big number. Um, but I don't know. My gut feeling from my experience with optimization and just programming in general is that it's not going to be a big deal. And
yeah,
then, but where it is a big deal is on C++, right? Where the most used nodes are written. And in C++, you can't just use arbitrary precision integers, which is pretty much what you need to deal with integers of this size. You can't just do that trivially, right? It's a significant deal to do that. But it's also not all that hard. And
right,
apparently, Jason and Callan have been working on this and have done a lot of this. So we invited Jason and Callan to come join us, but they haven't been able to make it. But I would have loved to hear more of
yeah,
their thoughts. But they've been working on it, and apparently they've already done it. They've made the implementation and not only confirmed that it works and it's not that big of a deal, but that when you look at the performance of things and the worst case of things, it all seems very reasonable, and I believe it. Jason is super thorough, incredibly thorough when it comes
yeah.
to coming up with test vectors and making sure that all the edge cases are covered and so forth. So my gut feeling is that it's actually going to be all right. It's just a matter of timing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, and so the other thing I want to kind of uh, urge people to consider is that Bitcoin Cash is we do things differently now, and we care about confidence. We really care about inspiring confidence. So no matter what your personal opinion on the proposals themselves, regardless of timing there is, like I really want I really want both of this to make it. And John here, I'm sure is the same. But
Even more than
there,
you.
yeah, yeah. Um, but there is a very big difference between if things become pretty well hashed out, in August. Um, Perhaps, hopefully, the earlier part of August rather than the later part of August. Test vectors are there, the implementation is tested, and then we can start going around collecting signatures already, and all the implementations are jumping on it. Versus if all of this happens in October. All right, like if all of this only happens in October, like I personally, my stance would change. Like I like it, but I just can't stand behind this. Like this is nuts. This is irresponsible. Um, so there is a huge difference between these two scenarios. No matter what you think about the technical changes themselves. So I would urge people to keep this in mind. Be cautiously optimistic. Um, do keep in do keep confidence in mind as well. Not just the proposals themselves. And if you really want to see that happen, jump into it. Examine. Bug Callan and Jason about it, and come up with scenarios and rationales, and fill that issues list and talk on it, and talk on Bitcoin Cash research. You know, you can help. You can help personally to get it going faster. Uh, don't just sit around and watch it happen or not happen. That's what I want to urge people to do.
Yeah, in the end, chip is has technical elements, but chip is a social process because we recognize that there are humans involved here. And so at the end of the day, it's a decision making process, right? So yeah, you're part of that, and every node, every company who's building something, every team, Every project that's working on this has a stake in it. So yeah, jump in
Well,
and
even
see
well,
if you can
even
help.
well, not just the projects and companies.
It users, holders, yeah, everyone.
It's a freaking consensus process. It impacts everyone, including if you just like hold some BCH.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, everyone is, who touches BCH is a stakeholder here. So yeah, in the end, individuals have got to make a decision. That's how chip process works, and we'll see how things go. All right. I think we've gone through enough of it, and I think shared our hopes and our concerns, and how we hope things will turn out. And in the near future, General Protocols will publish an official opinion on somehow combining both VM limits and big ends. So we'll have to, of course, make a statement based on what's available today, and but we may have some forward-looking statements also on how we think things might play out in some hypothetical scenarios. We'll see how it goes. All right. You name anything you wanted to wrap up with? And guys in the audience, did anybody want to get up and have any questions or discussion before we wrap up?
Put up your hands.
We're not in a huge need for wrapping up right now.
I see Jeremy there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than my, other than my, other than me urging people to do their parts.
So, you know what? I realize I do have one more thing to say. We do have precedent for the, you were saying this October scenario where things come in at the last minute. And in the past, it was even worse, like much worse. I remember ABC came out with, I don't remember what it was, but they came out with some upgrade that they wanted to do like the month before the actual upgrade. Not 6 months before, because right, November would be 6 months before, but the month before the actual upgrade. Do you remember what that was?
I don't. I remember something like that happening, but it's been a few years.
I mean, one of them was the stupid mining tax, whatever it was. They did one of those like at the last minute also, but I don't think it was that. There was
that was unrelated to BCH anymore.
yeah. No, but there was one that actually went in and it like came out like a month before, and it was ludicrous. So just as a as a data point, right? If you go back in history and look at that point, was
that Segway recovery? No, probably not.
I don't remember. But anyway, it came out, and at that point, right, like you end up in a bit of chaos. And as soon as you got that chaos, people outside of the BCH ecosystem and inside, but especially people outside, like exchanges and mining pools and miners, they look at BCH and what's going on because they're not blind, right? They may or may not like BCH, but they're watching to some degree. And they see, oh my God, it's a mess over there. It's a month before upgrade, and they're going to change consensus. Is there going to be another split? Is literally the question that will be asked in all kinds of places, right? They'll be like, oh my God, look, they're going to have another split. Look, there's all this controversy and kerfluffle, and things are in a mess. Are they going to have another split? Is what they will literally be at. Because I've had that question asked to me several times, even on like upgrades where there was no issue, there was no contention. Everybody was already like super in consensus way ahead of time. I still get asked that question, right? Wait, you guys are doing another upgrade? Is there going to be a split? It's like the first question people ask. So yeah, the confidence, building confidence, and building that Lindy effect of BCH is solid, BCH continues to upgrade, BCH doesn't have problems, BCH is professional, it's reliable. You have to build that confidence up. Can just continue building it up, and it's so easy to lose. So yeah, keep your eye on the prize. The prize is bigger than any individual chip upgrade. So yeah, keep that in mind, and remember the past. Remember how things can go well and how they can go poorly. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll put up some shorts so that you can cut out all my nonsense and long-windedness, and probably just share what Uname has been saying in some nice shorts. And then we'll publish that article that I mentioned as well. All right, take care, everybody. It's been good to have you, and it was good to talk. You name.
Oh, thank you.
All right, take care, everybody.